The world has changed. The world is changing day to day, or more accurately, hour to hour. And today we're going to host a conversation. But to begin with, I wanted to start on a real inspiring note. And that is that while we are being tested, while communities are being tested like they have never been before, we are seeing incredible stories come out from around the world. So shout out to our colleagues who are joining us from around the world. We see what is happening in your communities as well, and it's incredible. Stories of resilience, of creativity, of neighbors showing up for neighbors, of solidarity, of joy. The singing from the balconies is incredible. And so while we are sitting in this moment and holding on to quite a lot, it helps me to hold on to hope when I hear those stories. So please keep sharing those stories. Please keep spreading them throughout your community. It does make a difference. To our Community Foundation staff, volunteers, board members, thank you for all of the incredible work that you have been doing over the last few days, few weeks, as we move into a space in Canada that we have never experienced before. And I really want to say that we see you. We know exactly what you are holding and that it is heavy. And the work that you are doing matters. It is making a difference. This is, as many are saying, this is an extraordinary moment. And extraordinary moments require extraordinary responses. And we see that that is what you are doing. You are adapting with speed over perfection. You are standing in bravery as opposed to perfectionism or protectionism. Your continued leadership is having and making a difference every day to people in your communities. And we really just want to express our gratitude, our appreciation, our wonder at all that you are doing while holding on to your own stress. It is real, and what you are doing is truly having an impact. So thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Andrea. And I absolutely echo all of Andrea's comments. If your family is like mine, you've been huddled at home, huddled around the TV, listening to the radio or receiving news on your devices, trying to ascertain and derive some level of comfort and certainty. And that's been a really difficult process over the past few days. What we've seen is that there have been daily updates from our Prime Minister and a large stimulus package. We also know that the type of support that municipalities and provinces are offering differs from coast to coast to coast. But I wanted to highlight and draw attention to some of the key areas of focus for the charitable and nonprofit sector through the most recent stimulus package. The government announced a 3-month wage subsidy for small employers, and that would capture a lot of charities and nonprofits. The government's also set aside $157.5 million to support those that are homeless as a consequence of the current crisis. The government's also put another $50 million into women's shelters and sexual assault centers as well to deal with increased demand. As you may have seen in the response online and in the media, the stimulus package has been welcomed by the business community and individuals, but at the same time, we know it won't be enough and it has certain shortcomings. The sector met yesterday, over 200 leaders organized by Imagine Canada, to talk about some of these gaps, to talk about additional areas where resources are required, both in the immediate short term and in the long term. We have seen community foundations innovate and stretch themselves and respond and to help support those on the ground community agencies. And we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. We're also seeing corporate partners and individual philanthropists step up during this time, and we'll also highlight some of that. There's also been discussion about an awareness building campaign to stimulate giving and to stimulate overall philanthropy and leadership at this time as well. we'll address that later too. I'll turn it back over to Andrea.
Thanks, Andrew. So today, I think we can go to the next slide, Cindy. Thank you. So today is about sharing some of the actions that you are each taking that we can collectively take together as we navigate this new way of living and being here in Canada. As I mentioned, we're seeing many of you take action already. And so today we wanted to highlight really 5 areas where we are seeing community foundations step forward collaboratively in their communities and who are taking extraordinary steps to support the citizens within their community. So the first is, and I'll just go through what they are quickly and then we'll sort of dive into them, but these include creating safe and healthy workplaces, providing adaptive and flexible support to grantees, mobilizing a response in your community, providing clear and consistent communications while doing it all, and also holding on to what is at the core of community foundations and our work, and that is building belonging in community. So we'll go to the next slide, Cindy. Thank you. Wonderful. We can actually just go right on to the next one. Perfect. So we know that many of you are thinking about your workplaces. Several community foundations have moved, as you can see, CFC has moved to working remotely so that we can ensure the safety of our team. And I know many of you are doing the same. This work from home creates a new reality that has some best practices that we want to share with you. So perhaps we'll move to the next slide, Cindy. Thank you. So as we were thinking about best practices connected to creating safe and healthy workplaces, these are the ones that we wanted to highlight. There are many more. One other example that we wanted to share was something that CFC did was, I think it was yesterday, I'll be honest, the days are blending together a little bit, but we hosted a learning session for our staff with a naturopathic doctor. And this doctor came in to talk about how we can build our personal immune systems. And so we're really thinking creatively about different ways that we can support our team members, recognizing that many have small children who are now out of school and are at home. Many are working in not their typical environment. And so there's lots of creativity that we can share. And I know we have webinars coming up that will dive deeper into this particular topic. But a few best practices. First of all, many of you, and if you haven't yet done so, I would encourage you to do so, is to take a rapid response to office closure or restricted access and to ensure that you are communicating this publicly and communicating it often. We're doing daily check-ins with our staff. We're trying to create space for the water cooler conversation by hosting virtual lunches, by making sure that we're checking in with people. We're encouraging team members to establish a routine while working from home. This is something I'm personally working on. If someone would like to offer tips, I'm happy to take them. We're also looking to ensure that we're offering flexible hours, recognizing that personal situations are different from home to home, whether it's supporting elderly family members, whether it's supporting neighbors, or having children at home. The last tip that we put together here is to ensure that we're establishing virtual meeting protocols. And these can be really simple. Having an agenda, having a facilitator or a host, testing the system, leveraging the chat box as we're doing here today. In our work, we are often in remote places, and so these are some of the practices that we've found to be particularly beneficial here at CFC. We'll move on to the next one. And I'll just say that March 30th at 1 p.m. is a webinar specifically around best practices and your workplace. So that's another opportunity to dive deeper into that particular topic. So the second area where we're seeing a lot of wonderful work across community foundations is adaptive and flexible support for grantees. So if we can turn to the next slide, Cindy. Just a few examples, and there are many. Many of you are being very thoughtful. So a quick few examples. We're seeing foundations, community foundations and private foundations, look at ways in which they can reallocate the grants that they've put out into communities. And so if grants are specific for something that now in this new world seems that it needs to pause, foundations like the Calgary Foundation are allowing their grant recipients to use the money where it's needed most at this time, whether it's to increase opportunities for community support, whether it's their own operating dollars, but really trying to move into a space of how can we help you? How can our funding be flexible in the world in which you are now existing? So flexibility is another example we're seeing. So we know that the Nanaimo Foundation, as one example, is extending extra flexibility in terms of their timelines around things like neighborhood small grants or other programs. So that flexibility, recognizing people might need more time, is really important. Another great example is the exploration of multi-year funding. And so we heard from our friends with the Sunshine Coast Community Foundation, and they're exploring 3-year grants into their community, recognizing that the experience we are having right now with COVID-19, it will come to an end, but the ramifications of it will exist for many months, if not years. And so that multi-year funding to the sector is particularly important. So wonderful for you to be doing that, Sunshine Coast. Just back to the other slides, still, Cindy, thanks. We're also hearing about many of you who are activating your stabilization fund. So recognizing that this is the moment for you to step into the space of offering more support, not less, really leaning in with that courageous approach, despite the fact that, of course, we are watching the market volatility as well. So the Surrey Cares Foundation is an example in which they are activating their stabilization fund, really wanting to ensure that they can deliver grants. Wonderful. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Cindy. So we've just articulated some of these best practices here in a list for you. They really speak to the examples that I have just shared. So let's move on to the next one. Thanks. In case you're wondering, I'm navigating 2 screens here. And so if I'm delayed slightly, that's just why. So the next is mobilizing a response. And this is where we're really seeing community foundations move into a space in which they're thinking not only about the existing infrastructure or their existing toolkit, but they're really looking at what other tools can we gather in this moment? What else can we do because our community needs us? So let's move to the next slide, Cindy. Thank you. So a few really quick, wonderful examples. Building knowledge about community needs. So the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation sent out a quick survey with 5 questions to their charitable partners to really ensure that in this new moment, they understood the needs of their community and they're building response from that. We're seeing rapid response grants being issued by community foundations. So the Winnipeg Foundation recently announced, and right away in the moment of this pandemic, announced that they would be providing emergency funding to charitable organizations that are serving vulnerable populations, including shelters, food service supply organizations, etc. So lots of really wonderful examples there of rapid response. Another example is creating something new. So a response fund. Many of you are telling us that you're getting phone calls from your community members saying, how can we help? Which is amazing. It's really wonderful. And so some of you are thinking about creating a new COVID-19 response fund so that you can be issuing some of those urgent funding requests, that you can have longevity to the way in which you are supporting the community. So many of you are doing this. One in particular that we know are working in collaboration with Canada Helps, and that is the Innisfil Community Foundation. Others who are stepping forward with the creation of a response fund include Quebec Philanthrope, the West Van Community Foundation, among many others. So there will be some learnings that we can share in another session where we dive into how that is working. And then a last example that we wanted to share about mobilizing a response is community coalitions that are being built. And so community foundations really leaning into your partners within your community. So whether that or not that's your local United Way, your municipality, your university, college, etc., but coming together and working collaboratively. So the Toronto Foundation has a great example of doing that, in addition to a rapid response fund also. So if we can go to the next slide, we've articulated just a few pieces of best practices associated with mobilizing this response. And I really want to underscore the observation that we have of community foundations who are taking a both and approach. Both and being, how do we use our existing tools and how do we gain new tools so that we can respond in this time of crisis? So a few best practices there. Some are more about philosophy, like being bold. This is the moment to do that. Others are more tangible, like ensuring that you're reaching out and connecting with other funders, governments, et cetera, to coordinate. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew just to talk a little bit through this.
Thank you, Andrea, and appreciate you highlighting so many of the wonderful things that are happening locally across Canada. Obviously, Andrea, I know that that isn't an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. We have many, many more stories of leadership, increased community capacity, and organizations stretching themselves to be responsive in the moment. But highlighting even a few certainly helps to inspire all of us. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn our attention now to, or move from local to national, and perhaps take many of us back about 10 months ago when we all gathered together in Victoria, BC at our biannual conference. And for about 5 years now, we've been talking about belonging and trying to understand belonging in the context of the 21st century and the changing nature of our country. Belonging has become a centerpiece for this movement. We've activated it in a variety of different ways. You've activated it locally and regionally so well. And right now, in this period of distance, of isolation, belonging couldn't be any more important as we think about our personal, psychological, and physical requirements each and every day. A requirement to have a home, to have shelter, to sustain ourselves, to have a connection. Belonging is right in there and something that we can't lose sight of. Which brings me to the current state of our frontline agencies. And Andrea and I have been in discussions both with community foundation leaders across the country. We were on a phone call, as I mentioned earlier, with leaders from across the sector, representing organizations that you'd be familiar with, in some case organizations that you would support, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club, the food banks, the United Way, Red Cross, many, many more. All these organizations that are critical to the healthy functioning of our civic society and our democracy. And many of these organizations, even in the best of times, are challenged by liquidity requirements, business continuity requirements, and capacity. And that particular segment of our sector is really struggling at the moment. There's been lots of attempts to define what the challenges are in terms of a monetary requirement. We know that the next 3 to 6 months will be critical. A lot of these organizations, if they don't have an injection of liquidity soon, will be at that stage of crisis if they aren't already within weeks. There are estimates that say that in order to keep these agencies propped up over the next 3 or 4 months across Canada will require probably $1.5 billion to $2 billion of liquidity. At the same time, we know our government is certainly focused in on keeping the healthcare system working and fluid, both with with money, with labor resources, and with equipment. We also have to look at these frontline agencies that don't necessarily fall into the category of quote unquote healthcare, but are critical to ensuring that the entire system works seamlessly and can meet the increased demands that are within our communities today. Um, the Pan-Canadian national collaboration is not anything that is new to our network of community foundations. We've been collaborating nationally on many things. We have a track record and we have a way of working together. Many of you will be familiar with the Welcome Fund, where we help to resettle refugees from Syria. Almost all of you participated in the Canada 150 Fund, where we activated community engagement and leadership around our sesquicentennial. And even in real time, we are working together on a pan-Canadian basis to get the field ready for impact and social investments through the Investment Readiness Program. I had some nostalgia earlier this week. I joined the Community Foundation movement at the London Community Foundation, January 3rd, 2007. And that a few months later was the beginning of one of the worst financial crises we've ever seen in the globe, and particularly in Canada. And I remember at that time, community foundations really coming to grips with their business model and their financial model, in that community demand was up. It was a time when communities needed us the most. And at the very same time, and this is where the tension shows up, our investments had taken a significant loss. And we were grappling with the tension of how do we keep our institutions moving? How do we keep leadership and governance in place, but at the same time respond to the increasing demand that's in the communities? Well, we find ourselves in the same position or in a similar position 13 years later. However, for someone who went through the first crisis, I can say that the work that we've been doing over a decade in advancing more creative uses of our own capital in impact investments, in the social entrepreneur economy, some of this work taking place right now through the Investment Readiness Program is serving us well. Andrea mentioned many of the creative and innovative things that community foundations are doing. We need you to continue to do those things. Now is the time to accelerate those discussions with your boards, with your donors, with your community members on how we can be more creative. Granting and our core business continues to be important, but doing things that are lateral and adjacent to that will continue to help us weather this storm and keep those frontline agencies in a liquid place and in a place of doing the good work that we continue to have them doing. We are working and in conversation with government partners. We are working with our sector partners. Andrea mentioned some, Imagine Canada, PFC, the United Way, the Canadian Red Cross, and we are in discussions around currently assembling a way to help deal with some of these liquidity requirements of frontline agencies. And so these are the agencies that we support every day in our own granting and through our own leadership and through our own collaborations and partnerships. And we're trying to find a way to develop a consortium of national partners across all sectors where we can help provide that liquidity requirement and keep them operating in an optimal way when we need them the most. Andrea and I will continue those discussions. They're fluid, they're ongoing, they're every day. And we will need you to help us activate any sort of pan-Canadian response. And so we want you to know that we're going to be coming back into this group. We want you to know that we're going to stay with you through a very fluid communication strategy. We'll be seeking your advice, your leadership. We will need that community knowledge, that local expertise, all the things that We've been harnessing over 100 years of community foundations. We're going to need it exponentially right now, and that's going to come to bear. And so you can expect to hear from both Andrea and I and our team in the coming weeks on how we can make that happen and how we continue to support our communities. Back to you, Andrea, or over to Genevieve.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm going to turn it over to our incredibly talented Director of Communications, Jen.
Oh my, what an intro. Thank you.
You deserve it.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be on a call with our community and to just know that folks across Canada are together in this. I'm calling you from the Laurentians, north of Montreal today. Tell me if my Wi-Fi is unstable. We're in a rural community, so if I drop out, I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes on communications. So I think we're all in a space right now of the new normal and adjusting to the new normal. In a moment of social distancing and remote work, we see in the big ways and the small ways that communications, and specifically clear and really consistent communications, are pretty vital to us doing our work and carrying on, but also connecting with our communities and the range of stakeholders that we all have. Maybe you could flip to the next slide. So a number of you, I mean, I think everybody's kind of plugged into all sorts of media, and 2020 news cycles are minute by minute, second by second. So there's a tremendous amount of information. There's a tremendous speed and intensification of information. And in that, I think what I'm seeing certainly from so many community foundations on this call and beyond is a really amazing attempt and fantastic strategies to enact what you do in real life with your online communities who are ever more attentive at this moment. So you are pillars in the community, and you are providing really timely, vital, credible information as trusted sources. So there are a couple of examples here on screen of how foundations are doing that differently as we go. So Hamilton, really kind of driving folks to amazing and helpful resources municipally, in addition to all the activities that the foundation is doing. Winnipeg, if you go to their landing page, you'll see information about how to contact staff, specific information for donors, as well as sort of gateways to that emergency fund that Andrea was referencing earlier, right up top in a ticker bar. That's a strategy that others here listed also are using. I'm thinking of the Community Foundation of Northwestern Alberta. Oakville is pointing to a number of local charities. So for donors who are looking for a way in and looking for where their giving is most pertinent, the Oakville Community Foundation is providing some fantastic direction and leadership there. So all of those strategies are great. We're playing with a combination of all of that, and also trying to kind of bring this back to a human space and celebrate some of the instances of inspiration and resilience that we're seeing pop up in communities in Canada and internationally. Cindy, if you could go to the next slide. We've got a couple of tips here and just best practice reminders for folks who are in bigger comms teams and those who may be in smaller groups. So what we're really trying to do, and what we're seeing a lot of success, where we're seeing success from organizations, is really putting that people first message and being as upfront, as timely, and as kind of succinct about what you are doing to continue or manage your operations using any available channels to you. At this point, I think the more we can get consistent messaging out across various platforms that address and speak to different audiences, the better we are. And Andrea also spoke to a phrase right now that's very much inspiring my own work, and that is speed is better than perfection. Michael Ryan, who you might have been following from the World Health Organization, cited this in his epidemiology work. obviously we're committed to, being credible and trusted sources, but we also need to move fast. So communicating that information about your operations, communicating that information about your emergency response funds. You're doing this already, I think, in many cases, but linking out to very trusted sources and credible sources if you are linking out to third-party content. And then a shout out to Sharon, who at the Toronto Foundation did this really beautifully this morning in a webinar that she and her team hosted, was weaving in that work around belonging, around privilege, around power, and how we are seeking really to support some of our most vulnerable populations at this time, and keeping that equity lens front and center. We're also doing this work in partnership with so many others. So finding ways to, to give that shout out, or to retweet or modify a tweet by somebody that's working alongside you in community. We're trying to do that in our own strategy. And if you ping us in direct message on Twitter, happy to reshare any content. I say Twitter, but it could be Instagram, it could be Facebook, or any other platform really. We're also keen to share and create a bit of a hub on our webpage. So if you're producing resources that we can share and sort of crowdsource for the sector and smaller foundations, by all means. And maybe I'll just wrap this up, because I know we want to leave some time to talk about questions, with a couple of last thoughts. So you've seen the volume of information. We, in the last week, have really sort of worked through, and it hasn't been perfect, but we're sort of refining our processes as we go. What are the best ways to consolidate info, to make it as succinct as we can, to make it as consolidated as we can, so that we're not, continually issuing messages. So keep that in mind. I say that as also as a reminder for ourselves. And finally, I think a good number of you on the call are registered, but just in the event that anybody missed it, the communications folks from foundations across the country will be meeting tomorrow in a similar call to this, just to chat through what the opportunities are to share information and so forth, where our challenges are, how we can support each other. So that's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need the details, feel free to just email me, and I'll be happy to pass those along. And I think the last piece, and this is something that Andrea spoke to that I won't repeat, is that importance around internal communications and finding the ways to support one another and support each other as colleagues during this time. So if ever you need to reach out on anything comms related, please feel free to connect with myself, anybody on the CFC team, my colleague Amanda, who's also in our comms team, will be more than happy to jump on a call or a Zoom. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jen. We can actually go to the next slide, Cindy. The next one as well. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So the last element that we're really seeing community foundations lean into is about fostering belonging. And this is at the heart of community foundations, and it has been for a very long time. And in this moment, in this new world in which we are all living in, this is our moment to step into this through our grant making, through our communications, through the stories that we are sharing. I think we are all aware that with this social or physical distancing, with the isolation that people are feeling while they are experiencing and going through a quarantine, all of this is on our mind, and I know it's on your mind as well. And so the way in which we step into this space even further with our actions and everything that we do, this is particularly important. And so again, whether it's leveraging the communication tools that Jen just referenced, whether it's coordinating with your local community partners, whether it's engaging your donors, supporting your team, checking in with them, all of that is about building belonging, and all of that is the stuff you know how to do so well. And so really our advice to you is to keep doing the good work that you do in this particular way, because it will make a difference. And, you know, if you're sort of struggling for what you can do, go out on your balcony, on your back deck, go to your driveway and sing. It seems to work for other countries. I think it could work in Canada. So, and videotape yourself, please, and post it to social media, and be sure to tag CFC so that we can see you and hear your beautiful voices. So with that, I want to conclude, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Cindy, who will help us to curate some questions. And really just to extend our gratitude again for the way in which you are acting, the quick way in which you are responding, the manners in which you are holding on to hope and helping your community to do the same. We see you. It is making a difference. We are hearing about it here in Ottawa, where I am, in London, where Andrew is, where our entire team is, and we're hearing the stories of the good work that you're doing in your communities in Canada and around the world. And so reach out anytime, make suggestions of ways that we can continue to support, and know that you will be hearing from us on a very regular basis. Cindy, back over to you.
Hey, thanks so much, Jen, Andrew, and Andrea. Really appreciate it. And you'll see, you know, there's some questions about online resources for meetings, and thanks, Andrea, for sharing that link. Again, go to our COVID-19 page on our website, and you will see this ongoing list of great resources and tools for us to do in our work. So a couple of questions here, and thanks folks for dropping these questions in, and please feel free to continue add. We've got a couple of minutes. So the one question is, you know, as Jen mentioned, rural communities, and we're always aware that we have to make do with smaller resources, so assets under management, than the major urban centers or the more established foundations, and yet our issues are real and huge. So we're looking for help and guidance, specifically as it relates to the unique rural and small community reality. And this might also relate to the number of that there are fewer number of organizations serving those communities as well. So Andrew or Andrea, any thoughts on that?
I can add a couple of thoughts. I think that there's different ways to respond to this situation, to this crisis. And some of those are financial and others are not financial. They're about using your voice. They're about convening people online, about being a solid organization, a solid voice in this time. And so some of the communication tools that Jen has suggested are particularly relevant because they don't engage for their dollars. So that's one thing. So in the way in which we're being creative, in the way in which we're being stretchy about the work of community philanthropy and community foundations in particular, I think that of course we're conscious that we need to be mindful of investments. We need to be mindful of the resources, the financial resources that we have available to us. But I would encourage you to lean into that community knowledge, that local leadership, your voice, as other ways to support your community.
Yeah. And I think as we continue to build out our work on rural philanthropy, we'll see more ideas and strategies that we can make this happen. So it's definitely on our radar. Thanks, Lynn and Andrea, for sharing the link to the KW survey, and making it available for other foundations to take a look at that. A question from Julie. Thanks, Julie. About anything going on with Indigenous communities based on CFC's commitment to reconciliation. And I know there's Nicole. Thanks for sharing one link to that as well. Any thoughts there, Andrew and Andrea?
Sure. I can highlight a couple of things. You know, one is the federal government announced as part of the $82 billion announcement that I believe was yesterday. They announced a specific $305 million portion of that to support Indigenous, or to create an Indigenous community support fund, which would address immediate needs in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation communities. And so I think there's a real opportunity there for us as we think about the ways in which we can amplify and add to that. So that's just one thing that I wanted to flag, that I know there are others who are thinking about this. The other is a reflection on the knowledge that we have about, in general, populations that are more vulnerable on a regular basis. And in moments of crisis like this, it is those who are living in precarious situations that are feeling the effects of this crisis faster and deeper. And so we think about Indigenous communities, some of which do not have access to clean water. How do you wash your hands if you don't have access to clean water? If we think about housing situations, both in urban communities and rural communities for a variety of individuals who would be classified as a vulnerable population. How do you self-isolate when you're living in the shelter system or when you're on the streets? And so these are all elements of ways in which we are trying to bring an equity lens to the conversations that we are having at a national scale. And I would encourage you to do the same at your local, in your local dialogues as well. And so in those collaborative conversations that you're having, I would engage your local friendship center. I would engage your local First Nations government if you can, and really work in a collaborative spirit, work in the way that you always work in order to ensure that you are reaching the full breadth of your community.
And I think as we move forward with some of these webinars too, Andrea, and one on our granting responses, we'll hear and learn more about how community foundations are particularly reaching out to some of those more vulnerable populations.
The other thing I would add is I was in a conversation yesterday with Chris Archie, who is the CEO of the Circle on Philanthropy. And I know that for members of the Circle, and this might be the time to join if you're not, that they are planning some online learning and webinars as well for their members about how can philanthropy and organizations who are part of the Circle further support Indigenous communities at this moment in time.
Yeah, great. And I love Leanne's comment that this was really timely. As she's listening to this webinar, she just got a request from the United Way locally to work together throughout Okanagan Valley. So that's great collaboration and outreach. And then a more technical question, or a governance question around, holding our board meetings virtually, and particularly as a lot of our community foundations are coming up to annual general meetings. And Andrew and Andrea, I don't know if you have anything to share about this, but I know that in a lot of incorporation papers, it states that meetings can be held electronically, and so that this would be one way to do it.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in with that one. Yeah, this is the time of year when a lot of those, the business of our institutions is taking place in a sense that we're having audits done. We're preparing year-end financial statements. We're getting ready for AGMs and T3010 filings, et cetera, and so on. We had our legal advice coming from Miller Thompson yesterday on a call with a broader group from the sector, indicating that although this hasn't happened yet, there's likely to be a lot of flexibility around the timing of filings on some of the requirements that cause us to come together as a board or as a group of members as an AGM. So although we don't have official communication in on that, I would err on the side of good intentions from our government partners, that the requirements will be eased, that deadlines will be pushed out, and that there will be some understanding around that. At CFC, we're looking at our board meetings and potentially just going to a virtual space for committee and board meetings for the remainder of the year. Decision hasn't been made yet by the board, but it is a consideration. We know that other community foundations have already made those decisions and will not be meeting in person. We certainly want to respect the advice of the public health agencies, which the government is taking, and that is to maintain the physical distancing and the isolation measures, and certainly reducing risk to others by not aggregating any large group of or number of people.
Great. And then Andrea, I'll have you maybe address this one around, does CFC have any governance documentation that we can share with boards to help with their comfort level around their risk and business continuity accountabilities as individual board members?
Well, first of all, I hope that there's board members from community foundations on this call.
Yes, there is.
So that's one way. Share this. That's coming in from Lynn, right? Lynn in KW.
Yeah.
Let us circle back. I don't have a resource that we have created specifically for this pandemic, but it's certainly something that we're thinking about with our own board, even in terms of business continuity and ensuring that we are moving forward in a healthy way and in a responsive way. So there's been a few resources that I have noticed others have shared that aren't from CFC, but are from other organizations, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but Tracy Bavrick shared it. And so maybe we can just make sure that that gets added. You know the one I'm talking about, Cindy?
Yeah, the governance coach. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll share that link with everyone, yes.
Okay, that would be great, because it might speak to what you're looking for, Lynn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd also just like to give a shout out to my team member who is posting things in the chat box under my name. I don't know who that is, but it's making me look like I'm able to do a million things at once, and I just need to clarify that I can't.
I know. I was being quite impressed there, Andrea.
It's not me.
This is JP, and for whatever reason, my login says Andrea Dix on it. So,
okay.
These are emergent experiences that we're having here too.
Yeah. And just not to belabor this, but the March 30th webinar, I know a lot of you are moving into these virtual meetings and how to engage. And, you know, we're partnering with Grantbrook, and in addition to just some good common best practices on how to do this meeting virtually. And frankly, I just got off one earlier today that was extremely painful, and how we can be effective using these tools, but also some cool tricks, you know, to maximize if you are using things like Zoom or Mirror or others, around how you can be effective and engaging, and rather than just staring at a screen the whole time. So yeah, and then bingo, that's a good option. Yes, I'm sure a lot of you have seen on social media the bingo card around virtual meetings, and I think I'm guilty of every one of those. So I, you know, check. We'll have the registration link posted by the end of the day, hopefully, and you can join us on the 30th. Yeah, share, Lynn, if you can share the Norton Fulbert call, that would be great. And folks, really just to, again, emphasize, we're pretty much at the top of the hour. If you have any other questions or concerns, please reach out to us. We have recorded this webinar. It will be posted on our events or in our resource library on the CFC website. So check it out in the next 24 hours. And Erin, thanks for sharing some other resources and tools for making online meetings more engaging. That's great. So Andrew and Andrea, any closing comments? Jen?
No, thank you, Cindy, for hosting, and to our team for helping to pull this together, and just much gratitude to everyone for joining us and for the work you're doing in community.
And please use this time to connect with family, catch up on conversations, stay active, stay healthy, breathe, meditation, walks, whatever's required.
Great. Thank you so much. So nice to see so many of you online today, and I'm sure this won't be the only time in the next few weeks. So thank you and take care.